ganito juego. So, Landslogan Key. So I'm continuing with the videos for the men's program. I believe this is video number 6. So with this video, what I want to delve into is taking a look at relationships. Now, when I say that, this is going to be a fairly clinical, because it's going to be a description of a basic set of relationship types. So there are 3 types. Every relationship out there that you can engage in some way or another, can be lumped into one of these 3 relationship types. And that's whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, even something as minuscule as the quick interaction with a checkout clerk when you're buying items at a grocery store or department store or something. Because anytime that you engage in an interaction with someone, that's a relationship, right? So coming at it, looking at the word relationship from a therapeutic sense, it has a very broad understanding. So in that, with it having a broad understanding, when I'm hearing the word relationship for myself, because I work as a counselor, I've been doing it for 28 years, I'm hearing 2 things. On the one hand, when I hear the word relationship, there's what I've been educated to understand relationships to be, which is just that. It's an interaction between 2 people. At its base form, that is a relationship. So I'm hearing that. And without any further description beyond that, because I do everything I can to not make assumptions about things, I don't immediately make an assumption about what the person who's saying the word relationship is defining it as, other than an understanding that it is 2 people interacting. But also, given that, I also have an understanding that, for the most part, most people in general, when they're referring to relationship, it's usually the romantic kind of relationship that's being referred to. And typically, if it's not, there's going to be some kind of effort made to explain that, because in all likelihood, that's also what they hear when they hear the word relationship, is a romantic one. So they know they feel that it's necessary to give a clear definition of what they mean when they're talking about this relationship. So that's both going on in my head, maybe not in yours, but that's what goes on in mine. So for me, that tells me it's kind of an automatic thing. I need to listen more for how they're going to define whatever that relationship is. So, having said that, in the context of delivering the information to you, I am going to be using the romantic perspective of a relationship. So 2 people engaged in a partnership, romantic kind of partnership. But I want you to understand that in those definitions, they're not limited to romantic relationships. They can be any relationship. All those dynamics will apply however that relationship manifests. So that's friends, co-workers, blood family members, and romantic relationships, right? So yeah, I guess that's the basics of understanding what I'm talking about when I'm saying these relationships. So take that with the understanding too, because we're talking about romantic relationships, and we're in the present day. There's some struggles with definitions around what is a romantic relationship, whether that's monogamous, polygamous, um, based in, oh, I can't remember the word now. For lack of a better word, straight, or gay, um, or however it manifests. Right? Those are all implied in this definition as well. So be aware of that. Right? So, because the typical is man woman, and that's generally how I explain it. But it's, it encompasses all of those things. So, where I typically start with explaining this is before talking even about becoming engaged in a relationship with another person, I talk about the individual, the person. So that would be you, whoever's listening to this and watching this, you as an individual. So, and there's a number of ways that this all begins, depending on your perspective, depending on your understanding, depending on your beliefs. So I'm going to try to capture a few of those. So, and in particular, coming from the spiritual side, because I'm Haudenosaunee, and that's what I grew up with. We have a particular perspective on how we came into this world, why we came into this world, the circumstances that led to us coming into this world. So I'll start there. So typically, as we understand it, as I've been taught to understand it, there is a spirit, and the spirit has made the decision that they want to experience being alive. So they have a lot of options available to them. What kind of life do they want to live? So now, when this was first explained to me, it was the explanation was limited to human. But as I've heard more, I've come to the understanding, and if understanding the spiritual side of things, this makes sense to me, that it's not just human. That spirit is a spirit. So it's not defined the way we define life here. So we talk about the human spirit or the animal spirit, or different kinds of animal spirit. It's a spirit. So it's trying to make a decision about what kind of life it wants to have, what kind of life it wants to experience when it comes here. So there's conversations that it has with other spirits, the creator, however you want to label that or understand that. And there's suggestions made. In how we understand it, that's the questions that are asked of the spirit. What do you want to learn? What do you want to experience? That's basics. Different explanations have, there's been more to it, but that's basically what it comes down to. So they decide, and they are brought into the world. So at that point, they are a conscious spirit. They are a conscious being in a living body. So from the Haudenosaunee understanding, a child born into a human existence, until they utter their first word or make their first statement, knowing what they're saying. So the typical explanation is saying mom or dad, and knowing that that's mom or that's dad. At that point, all the understanding that they came with is cleaned off their mind, cleaned off their brain, and they become what's called a clean slate. So there's been some debate in scientific circles about what it actually means to be a clean slate. So biologically, there's this belief, and there's some um, arguable validity to this argument, this explanation, that when someone is born, uh, they have all the tools. Typically, I mean not all. Not, there are some exceptions to that, but typically you are born with all the tools to become an independent, um, self-sufficient being. But those tools are very underdeveloped, um, and it's basic. It still needs to be formed. So in that sense, we're not born with the ability to walk. We're not born with the muscle strength to hold up our head. So that all has the body needs to develop, and we need to learn how to do that. We're not born with a sense of equilibrium, a sense of motor control. The potential is there, but we're not born with it. It has to be learned. And same thing with the brain. The brain still has more development to go, and also all the things that us as adults know, we're not born knowing those things. We have to learn them. And even then, once we learn basics, we're constantly adding to that learning and reshaping it and reforming it and making new connections about what we know. So it's this constant thing of development, right? But the reason why I explain all that is it's an understanding of that, how to bring together the process of learning in terms of relationships. Right? So as a living being, and in our teachings, how I have come to understand it is, part of the reason why we're put here is to learn and to experience. So I know some religious circles, some spiritual circles, they'll talk about asking for help or praying for help, whether it's from protectors or spirit beings or God or the Creator, however you want to label that. My understanding, and it's how it was shown to me growing up, is that we're not supposed to do that. We don't do that, and it wasn't done in my household. Wasn't done in my grandparents' household, as far as I understand. Because the understanding that both sides of my family have is that the Creator has already given us everything that we need. Now, it's not given to us on a silver platter. We need clothes to stay warm, but we're not given a set of clothes. They have to be created. Material has to be gathered, it has to be processed, and it has to be put together to make clothing. But the raw material is there, just as the raw material is there when we're born to become whatever it is we're going to become. Same thing. So we don't ask for anything in that sense. We're here to learn. We're here to experience. Creator gave us this mind to develop, experience the world, and make decisions. If you are in a state where you're constantly giving it to the Creator, and for some people that's what they do, and if it works for them, that's fine. But my experience of it is, the brain was made to be was given to us to be used. So learn to process, and constantly learn to refine that learning process. It's also an understanding of where we have an independent mind. So an independent mind, that means my thoughts are different from the person standing next to me. The reason for that is because we did not walk exactly the same road. My life experiences informed me, and my perception of those experiences formed whether I decided to like those things or not like those things, to learn more about them or leave it as just that experience, whatever I did with it. And it also informs my outlook on the world. And that's a unique thing for every human being. So that means there's going to be conflict. Now, remember how I talked about peace, and the idea that peace is not an absence of conflict; it's an ability to engage in a conflict in a healthy way. And that's why, because we have these free thinking minds. So that process starts from birth, experiencing the world, and literally, that's about all you can do when you're born, is experience the world. You experience the sensations of hot and cold, feeling uncomfortable because of what's in your stomach. Your body not yet accustomed to processing food, so babies puke. And if you've seen a baby puke, it's very different from an adult puke. It's just part of what they do. Sometimes they cry. My experience, largely they don't. It's part of what happens. Whereas an adult, we feel that need to vomit, and sometimes there's a bit of panic that, oh no, what am I going to do? I don't want to do this. I don't want to feel this, and there's a bit of a sick feeling that comes with it. Babies don't have that yet, so it's an experience though, and everything is an experience. Everything is a development. So eventually we learn to sit up, hold our head up, stand up, maintain our balance, walk, run. We learn how to control our fingers. We learn how to control our toes. We learn how to go to the bathroom without having to wear a diaper. We learn to speak, and that's where that whole, when I talked earlier about that first word or first phrase and knowing what it is that you're saying. That's part of the development. So what we say is, before you can do that, a baby has 1 foot in the spirit world and 1 foot in this world. Once you learn that word, you are fully here and you are fully experiencing this world. So all of that goes into who you become, and how you change and how you expand as you get older. So you learn what you like, you learn what you don't like, you learn what interests you, you learn what is not of any interest to you. You learn what you're good at, you learn what you're okay at, and you learn what you're not good at. You also learn emotional skills. Sometimes those skills are expansive and they're huge. Sometimes they're very minimal. You also learn how to read. Now, when I say read, you have books, but more what I mean is, how do you perceive things? How do you understand things? So when we talk about communication, one of the tropes in there is that 95% of communication is nonverbal. And typically the interpretation of that is body language. And that is a lot of it, being able to read someone's body language. It's a lot more than that though. It's also learning how to hear different inflections in language. How one word can be tensed differently to convey a different meaning. The mood, being able to read an interaction between two people. For as long as I can remember, watching two people interact, particularly people who have a romantic interest in each other. I can read that, but I've never been successful at reading when someone is interested in me. So, difference in perception, those kinds of things. Knowing when two people are really clicking, whether that's friends or romantic or however it is, and knowing when two people are just not connected. Being able to read something like that. So some people call that energy, some people call it reading a vibe, things like that. But that's part of that 95%, right? And that's about experiencing the world. All part of it. Your perception of it, and how you integrate the things that you perceive. The decisions that you make about how you behave. I know myself as working as a counselor, one of the things in that communication is understanding my audience, whether that's one person or a group that I'm presenting to, or an auditorium of people. Certain people or certain situations or certain professions or however it comes together have a different way of perceiving what I'm saying. So I will have one message. Typically, like, for example, what I'm telling you right now. I am not presenting this the same way that I would do with a live audience. There's little differences that I would make because I have a live audience that I can interact with. This is creating a video that you're going to watch. So I don't have that same interaction. So it's going to be a little different. And even if I had an audience, it might be different if I'm doing it in a therapeutic context with a particular client. So there's, based on how I know that client and their situation, I might emphasize different things. Here, it's more of a general emphasis. So it's understanding how my audience is going to receive what I'm saying and gearing what I'm saying to that perception. Right? That's all part of that 95% of nonverbal communication. And I don't want to overwhelm you with that because sometimes you go, holy crap, I've not perceived any of that. You have. You're just not aware of it. Or maybe you are, but typically most people aren't aware that all of those processes are happening. But it's all part of how you receive the world and interpret it and respond to it. Right? And that's a constant process. However, from birth to death, that's a constant process. But typically, once you get to a point where you become interested in a relationship or become interested in a particular person, that's partly why that interest is there, is because of all those little things that you've read, your experiences about informing you about what you prefer, what you don't prefer. That's how those interests get developed. So the thing to keep in mind is when you meet that person, all those things that went into making you who you are, they went through the same thing. So if there's a connection, chances are there's some reflection in them, in you, and vice versa. Now they'll talk about similar interests and familiarity. How that brings people together, makes people attract people to each other, which is very true. They'll also talk about how opposites attract, which can also be true, but there's more potential for problems in that sense of opposite. And we'll delve into that once I get into explaining the three relationship types. And so, but that's all part of how people come together. And it can be very nuanced, particularly in the present day, in how people perceive building a relationship. So we're not going to really talk about building a relationship, a little bit, but not a lot. More what I'm going to do, the majority of my focus here is once the relationship is established, this is what the relationship looks like in terms of its basic components. Right? So typically what people want is the healthy, fulfilling, stars and moon, that kind of romantic relationship. Right? So what happens is you have made this world that encompasses who you are and all that went into that. And you meet someone who has done the same thing. They've created this world. And there's a lot of connection between those worlds. There's a lot of compatibility in those worlds. So you meet and you discover that you both like hot dogs. You both like an Orange Julius. You're both athletic. You both like playing sports, recreational. Play a little college ball. She played a little college basketball. There's things that draw the connection. So that's, hey, okay, you've got my attention. And then with that, exploring a little more, there's a lot more connections there as well. And the attraction isn't just about the connections anymore. It's about an appreciation for that person, and that appreciation coming back at you. It's a mutual thing. So you establish this relationship, that you're interested in each other, and that connection is romantic. Okay. So what happens is, there's these two worlds. There's your world and there's her world. And in the middle is this world that you both contribute to and create. Right? So it's a third world. And that world does not exist without both of you participating in it. Right? This world is you. And you exist as a fully functioned, fully formed who you are. And a fully developed and fully developing who you are. And it can exist regardless of anybody else's interaction. She's done the same thing. But when you meet, you create this world. And the parts of the world that are the same are fed into this world. It helps make the building blocks of that world. The hot dogs, the sports, the collegiate athleticism, all of that. And there's tons more that goes into that. And the mutual admiration, the esteem, and the respect, and all of those things. That's all part of that world that you create. But there's also things about you and about her that aren't compatible, that aren't connective pieces. You abstain from alcohol. She doesn't mind a glass of wine every once in a while with friends. You have made a decision. You're not going to consume. It's cool if she is, so long as she doesn't get out of hand. So that's not something that you guys are going to share. I mean, you might sit together while she has a glass of wine, but you're not going to participate in the consumption. And she may go off with her friends to do that. You go off with your friends to do other things. So that's something that doesn't get contributed to this world. She loves seafood. You can't stand seafood. All that means is you go to a restaurant where they offer seafood. She might order seafood. You're not going. You can still have a meal together. Differences like that do not cause huge problems in a relationship, in this kind of relationship. So if you're going to visualize it, and you're going to get a document that's going to be a visual representation of what I'm doing here. So there'll be this world that is created, and there's two worlds that existed before the big world is created. And there's going to be a connecting line, and it's your feeder. But there's also going to be a line that's blocks. What that means is there's going to be things about her that does not come into your world, and there's going to be things about you that doesn't go into her world. It also means that you do not have to be tied at the hip, because a big part of this world that you created together, that you both exist in and contribute to, and get support from, trust is a huge component of that. And remember how I talked about trust before. This is the big trust, right? Trusting each other with one's life or something close to it. There's also some trust around fidelity, faithfulness. They can go out with their friends. I don't have to be there. She's going to have interactions with other people. She may have interactions with other men other than me. Okay, because in that, and there's many different versions, but the basics of it is, if you have decided that this is a monogamous, exclusive relationship, in interaction with a member of the opposite sex, other than yourself, is not a threat, because it's not so much worrying about what that other male is going to try to do. You can't control that. But the trust is that your partner who is committed to you won't engage any further than the conversation. And when I talk about that fidelity, there isn't one definition of that fidelity. Anything that you contribute to this world, and any of those catchphrases or catchwords that are part of that relationship, because communication needs to be such a huge component of that relationship. You have to define for yourself with each other how do you define those words. Now, mind you, that's a huge conversation about different forms of a relationship. But that's the key component, that you communicate what you want, what you don't want, what you'll accept, what is unacceptable in your relationship, and you agree. Now, sometimes that means making sacrifices. Now, when I say sacrifices, it can be a physical sacrifice. I understand that you like to have a glass of wine with your friends every once in a while, but I have things against the consumption of alcohol, and maybe that's the compromise. Is she no longer has a glass of wine, right? But those sacrifices and those compromises are negotiated, and they're not coerced. There's no mind games. It's an understanding that it's about a caring for each other, and an understanding for each other, and a compassion for each other. That's a huge thing in those relationships, is having that, particularly compassion. So be aware of that. And in this relationship, so if you think about the equilibrium of this relationship, so there's the line. Right? Actually, for the screen, there's the line. Right? That's equilibrium. This relationship has moments where it's very hot, and you can interpret that however you want, and it's probably a true interpretation. But it also has moments where it's cool. Things they're not big and hot and heavy, but connections there. You're not always up in each other's business, but it's cool. So that's the equilibrium line in the relationship. Usually stays about there, but it has this, hot, cold, and it has its moments, but it basically stays in a balanced space in that equilibrium line. That's normal, and that's healthy. There's going to be times when you guys are really close, and there's going to be times when you're not so close. There's going to be some distance. That's okay. It's healthy, right? You can't always be hot and heavy. Something that is very hot tends to burn and burn out. Something that's very cold tends to get frigid, fragile, and break off. So it has to go back and forth. And if it just stays on that even keel, that means, things are very comfortable, but you don't get a whole lot of excitement either, right? So that up and down, that back and forth, that's a healthy relationship. And what we label that relationship is called the interdependent relationship. So that base word, dependent. Interdependent means that you depend on each other. And in that dependence, you need to be really clear that it's not a dependence where things can fall apart if that dependence ceases to exist. For the most part, when we talk about it being, I'm able to depend on my partner and they can depend on me, it means that they don't have to. That's a key thing to that. It's not required, but you want to. So, just a very quick example. A past relationship. My girlfriend at the time lived in a different town, and so we would, one weekend here, then weekend there, back and forth. And typically, I'd go out on Friday, or she'd come here on Friday, and go back on a Sunday afternoon, late afternoon. Um, but this one weekend, I wasn't going to be able to make it Friday because I had laundry to do, and I let her know I'll be there early Saturday. So she asked why, and I told her because I had laundry, and she said, well, bring it here, and because she had a washer and dryer in her house. So okay. So in my mind, it was I'm going to do my laundry there. And when I got there, got up Saturday morning early to do my laundry. And as I'm getting ready, she said, I'll take care of your laundry. Now, at that point, I had been doing my own laundry for over a decade. I knew how I liked my laundry done. I had my routine down. And I liked my routine because it made my clothes the way I want my clothes. So I had this moment of, what? What do you mean you're going to do my laundry? I don't know how you do your laundry. Are you going to do your laundry the way I do my laundry? And these were thoughts that became verbal questions. And I did something that I would say is something that you never really want to do in a relationship is I hovered while she was doing my laundry. I mean, it wasn't a deal breaker in a relationship. That was other things. But we both agreed once it was said and done, it's probably a good idea I just do my own laundry. But that was part of the experience, getting to know each other. That's part of that whole process in a healthy relationship is that feeling out process, things like that. So be aware of that those are the things that happen in a healthy relationship. There's constantly learning and exploring with each other, figuring things out. So in that sense, I didn't need her to do my laundry, but I was willing to explore the idea that she do my laundry. And she, from the other side of that, was she knew perfectly well she did not need to or have to do my laundry. She was choosing to. Didn't work out in the end, but that was part of that relationship process, that being interdependent, knowing I can do it myself, but I'm allowing myself to depend on her to do it, and vice versa. So interdependent relationship. The next relationship is has all the same basics. Your world, their world, the attraction. Now, in this particular world, a lot of the attraction has more to do with admiration of the other. So admiring your partner for things that they do or they like, their ideas and things like that. Partly because they're very different from your own. You don't necessarily have anything against them, but they're not something that you want to participate in, but you like observing it and hearing about it. So in this relationship, there tends to be a lot less commonalities. So you like hot dogs, they like hamburgers. You're an early morning person, they're a night owl. You're very athletic, they prefer to lounge with a good book. Do some work, but not really do a whole lot of physical activities. Do the work, but they don't seek out physical recreation, things like that. They like seafood. You don't like seafood. There are a few commonalities, but the vast majority of the things that you explore, there's huge differences. And the thing is, those aren't deal breakers. That's great. That's cool. It's fine. But there's not a whole lot of world creation there. So there's this world, and this world is fairly loose. Not much to it. Not much connecting to it. It's kind of small, which is fine. If it's not a good relationship, that relationship will typically disintegrate fairly quickly, fairly easily, and there won't be any harm or foul in them ending the relationship. But the relationship can also work out well. They can stay together for years, stay together for a lifetime. But that's the couple that you very rarely see them out together in public. One is very community minded. One tends to stick to things like sports and concerts and things like that. They have different sets of friends. Their social groups don't interact a whole lot together. So there's a lot of separation. And it can work out. It can be fine. Now, in that relationship, remember how I said the equilibrium? Now, that line that goes there. This relationship, if it's fairly well connected, not a whole lot of ebb and flow. Right? So the line comes across, and then there's not a whole lot of difference in that line. It's comfortable. It's nice, but not a lot of heat, not a lot of cold, not a lot of connection, right? But definitely a lot of admiration, definitely a lot of respect. That's basically it. Yeah, that's basically it. See, there's not much to that kind of relationship, but it can be comfortable, it can be fine. So when I say that, I don't want anyone to make the mistake that I'm saying that this is a bad relationship or that it's a negative relationship. I mean, they can be, but for the most part, they tend to be just comfortable relationships. Not very exciting, but they're okay. And they're just perfectly fine. I'm not quite sure. It might not even have taken me 5 minutes to explain that relationship because of how little content there is to it. So in that, if the visualization you see on the document, there's your world, there's their world, and there's a connecting line, and then there's a line down the middle. Basically, you look and admire at each other, but you very rarely do you cross paths or create something together. Right? So the third relationship, and this relationship is where there's a lot of heat, and there's a lot of stuff to this relationship. So all the same stuff. Your world that has become what it is, their world that has become what it is. But there's a key difference in the creation of these worlds. Remember how earlier I said, your world is a complete world. This is who you are, with no input from anybody else. I mean, there's input from other people, but you've made decisions about that, and you've taken ownership of those contributions. People who engage in this third relationship. Oh, sorry. Before I move too much further, the second relationship, it's titled Independent Relationship. So in that relationship, so going back to the first relationship, for some reason that relationship were to end, whether they decide to end it or someone passes on or whoever that is, there's some deep feelings around there. Life-changing, impactful, mourning, grieving, definitely needs for supports. Because that connection is there, and there's usually a bit of turmoil around how do I carry on. If many of us have experienced this, where older relatives who have been married for years and years and years, when one of the partners passes on, in short order, typically within a few months, and actually statistically, usually not more than a year, the partner passes on as well. That's a world. That was part of my world, and part of my world is gone. So the will to stay, has also been diminished. That's that connection. That's an interdependent relationship. In the independent relationship, if that were to happen, there will still be mourning, and there'll still be this sense of loss, but there won't be a lot of a sense of how do I go on, because typically, other than the interaction, not a lot changes for either partner. right? Because you basically lived independently of each other. I mean, sure, there was probably some financial independence, making sure bills and car payments and house payments and things like that. But typically, they did for themselves while being together. That doesn't change very much. So um, that's where that is with that relationship, because there's a really good sense of completeness in both sets in both relationships. But in this relationship, that world from the outside is fully formed. From a practical sense, this is the full world. But the perception of the person who has formed that world has this either conscious or subconscious belief that they are incomplete, that they're pushing towards something and they haven't been able to get there, and consciously or subconsciously, the completion of their world must be supplied by another person. And they will typically find someone who has that same perspective. If any of you ever saw the movie Jerry Maguire, the climactic scene where he tells, was it Renee Zellweger? I think that's who it was. You complete me. For a lot of people, that was a heart melting, totally sappy moment, tear inducing. For me, when I heard him say that, I was like, oh no. Because what I was hearing was, oh, you need someone to complete you. That's not gonna, that there's a whole bunch of red flags that just popped up when I heard that phrase. Because in that relationship, once they feel like they've been completed by this other person, anything that threatens that intertwining, I don't mean that connection, I mean intertwining, right? There's no pulling that apart. It must be dealt with. So the visualization of this world, these two parts come together, and they start to make this world in between. So they come together, they come together, they come together, and if you notice, now that they're together, this and this no longer exist, because they were absorbed by the other to create this. And anything that tries to pull that apart must be dealt with. So remember how I said, you figured out about who you are. I like hot dogs. I like sports. I like action movies, things like that. But this person may like a couple of those things, but there's a couple of things that they are against. They like hamburgers. They like romantic movies. So in this coming together, because differences are seen as weaknesses and threats, one of you is giving up hot dogs, or one of you is giving up hamburgers. One of you is going to have to learn how to sit through action movies, or one of you is going to have to learn how to sit through romantic comedies. And there's no compromise in that. There can be, but very rarely. And typically, whoever is the one who has to make the compromise, because voicing that or struggling through that is also seen as a threat, they will bite their tongue, or at least whatever the conflict is will be small. May become resentful. Likely will become resentful. May retaliate in other ways. If I have to give up hamburgers, or if I have to give up hot dogs, then you're going to have to give up romantic movies. Okay? Because we're both going to give up something here. That's the compromise. Not, well, I'll have hot dogs while you have hamburgers. Tonight we watch action, tomorrow night we'll watch romantic comedy. No, somebody's giving something up. And if we're going to keep this even, then that's the even. If I got to give something up, you got to give something up. So they're both resentful. They're both upset that they have to give something up. And the thing is, remember how I talked about in the other example about, well, I'm giving up wine because my partner doesn't like the consumption of alcohol. And there may be some typically there are some very valid reasons behind that kind of sacrifice. This is just a tit for tat, right? It's not about, there's a reason why I can't compromise this. If I got to give something up, you got to give something up. And that tends to be a bit of a running theme. Anything that is perceived as, that is my dog. If you saw that little flippy thing on my shoulder, my bed's right there. That's my dog. I think that's the first time he's made an appearance in one of these videos. But that tends to be a running theme in this relationship. Any kind of threat must be gotten rid of. So, because trust is not a big part of this relationship. And when I say that, what I mean is it's not that there isn't trust, it's that it's very weak and it's very low. Very minimal. So threats can be perceived. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're real. So typically what you'll find in this relationship is that if you are the male, you will have to extinguish your friendships with females. Any interaction that is observed will be under some kind of suspicion. And that can be to varying degrees. And typically that's a mutual thing. So your partner, any discussion with another male comes under suspicion. Their friendships, you're not comfortable with their friendships with males. And typically, so this is just an example, and it's a typical example, but it's not the hard and fast rule. It can start out small. Who is that? That's your friend? How are you friends? How do you prove that? Things like that. And then it'll progress to, I don't think your friend likes me. Right? Putting it on them, not owning it themselves. I don't think your friend likes me. That progresses to, I don't like how your friend influences you. I don't like how you are when you're hanging out with your friend. I don't like how you are after you hang out with your friend. I think your friend is a bad influence on you. I don't think you should hang out with your friend. I don't think you should be friends. I want you to end that friendship. You have to end that friendship. See how that escalates. Because they're building this idea that this is a threat to our relationship, so it must be removed. And there can be other things that are added to that. If you loved me, you would get rid of this friend. If you really believed in this relationship, you wouldn't let something like that interfere. Right? Those are the kinds of statements that you're going to hear in this relationship. They will use a lot of things like guilt and shame. You may use a lot of guilt and shame in this relationship. What else is there in this relationship? I haven't talked about it in any of these videos. I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk about it in any others, but there's a thing called the cycle of violence. That's the label. There's a definition of violence, and I'll get into that. But that's what happens with this relationship. That's the heat. And in this relationship, remember how I said that equilibrium? There is no equilibrium in this relationship. It's all or nothing. So Any dip low, we got to build that heat back up. And the heat isn't just this nice simmering heat, it's we got to get hot. And we got to maintain that heat for as long as we can. Any cool down is usually the result of some sort of blow up. So even though the cool down is welcome, it doesn't last for long. They got to get that heat going again. Heat is important for this because they tend to use words like passion, ultimate love, those kinds of things. To as a participant in that relationship, that's their perception that that's what this is. It has to be this. We both have to be feeling it, and if I think you're not feeling it, there's something wrong with you. And I have to fix you. I have to do something to rebuild the heat, and I have to get anything else that's going to put some cooling water on it. So typically, the perception of people being a threat to the relationship isn't just limited to opposites, opposite sex, opposite gender friends. Could also be same gender friends. It starts to become family members. Don't like your brother, don't like your sister. I don't like how your mom talks to you. I don't like how your mom talks about me. I don't like the advice your dad gives you. So eventually what happens is they start shaving away. On the surface, what they're saying is threats. The reality is, and they may be consciously aware of it, typically they're not. Typically you're not, if you're the one doing it. What you're doing is you're getting rid of their supports outside of yourself. The idea in that relationship is only I can support you because only I can love you in this way and in this capacity. So you'll hear phrases. It's you and me against the world. Everybody else is against us. Yeah, that perception, that personification, that painting of what this relationship is. It's you and me. Ultimately, it's just you and me. And everything else that threatens that must go. If you have children, typically what you'll see in this relationship is the non biological partner may have issues with your children. Maybe even bigger issues if your children are adults, because there's no control factor there. You'll hear that term power and control. I haven't mentioned it yet, but this relationship, tons of power and control. That's what this relationship is. That's what it's about. To maintain the connection, we must have control over everything, which means one of us has to have power. And because of that lack of trust, it's not just not a lack of trust for everybody else, it's also a lack of trust of the person that they're trying to be connected to. So I have to control you. The thing is, though, in this relationship, because you're both coming from similar places, either consciously or subconsciously, they're thinking the same thing. So it's two of you fighting for control. Not a good situation. And because that perception is there that it's just you and me against the world and no one else can do this and everybody else is a threat, you're doing it alone. So the way I describe this as a visualization is walking in peanut butter. So if you can visualize this, there's a hallway. It's a wide hallway. However long you want to make it, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, 100 yards. But it's dimly lit, and the only door is at the other end of the hallway. And for whatever reason, you have to get to the end of the hallway. Now, in the visualization of this relationship, the goal is to get to the other side of that door, and at the other side of the door is um, bliss with your partner. So you got to get over there. So there's nothing you can grab to on the walls. The only way to get there is through this hallway. And this hallway's floor is peanut butter up to your knees. So you step in and you sink, because there's no stability until you get to the bottom. So now you're up to one knee in peanut butter. You're trying to go in that direction, so you step. And the thing is, because your foot is stuck in peanut butter, you don't realize how much you depend on flexibility to maintain balance until you don't have flexibility in your leg. So now you're stepping, trying to step, while your leg is stuck and not being able to move very much. So you're starting to feel unbalanced. And then you step into the peanut butter a little bit further away in front of this leg. Right, so you're in. You have two legs up to your knees in peanut butter. And you're kind of precarious. You're not balanced. But you still want to be moving forward. So now you have to pull this leg out of peanut butter. So it's not just a matter of lifting this. So you gotta grab hold of it. You gotta pull it. You gotta move things around. Get that leg unstuck and lift it. Now you're teetering on one leg with not a lot of flexibility to move to maintain your balance. You want to move forward, so you step forward and the other leg goes in. You got to keep going. So the other thing is, because you're struggling with pulling legs out of peanut butter, you're getting tired too. And if you've ever been in a situation where you've had to struggle through something like that, another way of describing it is running through a plowed field. Eventually, you get to a point where you're no longer focused on the destination. You're just focused on this moment. I gotta get this leg out. Okay, now I gotta put this leg back in. Now I gotta get this leg out. Oh, now I gotta put this leg back in. So you're not focused on the destination anymore. You're just focused on leg to leg to leg to leg to leg. That's what this relationship is. You stop focusing on anything other than this relationship, because anything that stops this relationship from running smooth, or even just potentially could be an obstacle, is going to be dealt with. So you become hyper vigilant, but you also become very focused on those kinds of things. You're not focused anywhere else. You're just focused there. And it's draining, because you must be hyper vigilant against perceived threats. And it's not even fun anymore because of how the struggle is. But anytime you try to pull away, it's like, oh, I feel empty. Come back. Pull away. Come back. Pull away. Come back. So if you haven't guessed by now already, the label for this relationship is codependent. Because in this relationship, the dependence part, that's part of the reason why there's pull away, pull back, pull away, pull back, is because even before entering the relationship, you've already established that your happiness depends on someone else filling the gaps. And when you pull away, you've opened up those gaps. Your perception is that you can't fill those gaps yourself. So you're dependent on this other person. And the thing is, as much as that's your thinking, that's also theirs. So you're both dependent on each other. You're codependent on being happy. You've made each other, even before you knew who each other was, responsible for your happiness. Codependent. So in those descriptions, give some thought. If you're in a relationship now, you fit one of those relationships. to some degree or another. But I also have this understanding that you fit all three of those relationships. It's just that the majority of the time you're in one. Sometimes you're codependent, and sometimes you're feeling vulnerable, and some of those things come out. The trick there, if you want to be in a healthy relationship, is you don't resist the repair. This resists the repair. A codependent relationship resists the repair, because part of that repair is dismantling. And when you're dismantling, that means a lot of the connective minutia is being taken apart. That's a threat. Can't do that. Right? And with an independent relationship, there actually isn't a lot of dangers and fears. Even if there is a threat that this relationship will end, both are pretty cool with it. It's not bad. I mean, might not be liked, it might not be desired, but they'll be okay if that's what happens. But even the healthy relationships will wander into periods of independence, periods of codependence, but they come back to being interdependent. Even the extreme codependent relationship has moments where, no, I think I'm cool. You go do your thing. Doesn't last very long, but it happens. Or that sense of trust, that sense of this is good, and it is good, but it's the same thing. It doesn't last long. They go back to being codependent. So if in those descriptions you are finding, I say very rarely. In my own experience, I've never had the experience of delivering this information, and the people I'm delivering it to haven't started to analyze it. Is this my relationship? Is that what we do? That's why I'm explaining to you that you will see yourself reflected in all three of those relationships. Where the potential concern is if you find that you're spending a lot of time in a type of relationship that you don't want to be in. Weird and crazy thing. And maybe not so weird and crazy because it feels normal for them. There are a lot of people who are in codependent relationships who do not see anything wrong with that relationship. Now, when I say wrong, what I mean is they're not recognizing the harm that can be a result of that relationship. They're not recognizing the dangers, the long-term dangers, not just physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that can happen in a codependent relationship. They're fine with it. They don't see anything wrong with it. And if they don't want to make a change, it's their life. They chose this life. They can choose not to change it. And really, who's to say that there's anything wrong? For me, because I've worked in family violence for the majority of my career, as well as working in corrections and working in addictions, working in mental health. For people to make changes positively, they have to recognize that the change is necessary, and then they have to choose to do something to do that. Remember how I talked about Edge of the Woods? We stand in the light, and we'll welcome you into the light, but we can't pull you in. That's what that means. If they're choosing it, sure, if there's physical danger, we can call the police and do things like that. But if they're choosing to be in that kind of relationship, can't make them change their mind until they see that there's a change that's necessary. Yeah. So, that was basics of those relationships. There's tons of variations that can happen, but that's the basics. And if that information has prompted you to take a cold and sober look at the situation that you're in right now. Don't do that alone. Seek out some kind of support. You're involved in a program, that's how you are able to see this video. So utilize that support if you feel you need to. Take care of yourself. And again, if there's any questions, ask. We'll see if we can figure out how to either get the answers from me, because I'm the one who presented this, or find some place where you can get answers. Other therapists, spiritual leaders, people that you trust. Yeah, and we'll leave it at that. So take care of yourself, be good, and I will see you in the next video. Right? Done it.